stay a little moment and introduce the moderator of the next session, and he's already there. It's Willem Jan from ING, my estimated colleague, and you have the pleasure to moderate the next session. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Thanks for this. Yeah, so in this session, we will be discussing how to assess the effectiveness of the internal audit function. And also similar to the previous session, I will be asking you in the audience to share your views via a couple of poll questions. And you can let us know your thoughts via the Slido box that we've been using throughout today. Also, time permitting, we may be taking 1 or 2 questions from you towards the end of today's sessions. But first of all, let me introduce the panelists who will join me in today's session and who are happy to share their insights from their respective viewpoints with us. First of all, we have Sarah Russell. Sarah is currently a member of the board of directors and chairman of the audit committee at Nordea Bank in Finland. But she's also a member of the supervisory board and chairman of the audit committee at the Currency Exchange Fund in the Netherlands. Sarah's career, she spent over 30 years in the financial sector, and in previous roles, she was amongst others the CEO of Aegon Asset Management and a member of the management board of Aegon. And before joining Aegon, she had a career at ABN AMRO Bank, in which she fulfilled various roles, including the CEO of ABN AMRO Asset Management. Big welcome to you, Sarah. Our second panelist is Dr. Henning Dankenbring, and Henning is a partner at KPMG within the ECB office. He has over 20 years of work experience within the financial services sector and provides advisory services to banks across Europe relating to meeting regulatory and supervisory expectations. And in addition to that, he's also responsible for auditing and advising risk management functions at large global institutions. Apart from his career and consultant and auditor at KPMG, Henning worked for over 3.5 years with a US-based special opportunities fund as an investment manager. And he started his career at the German central bank in the economics department, responsible for the macroeconomic modeling. I'm very happy, Henning, you're willing to share your viewpoints with us today. So also welcome to you. And thirdly, our third panelist is Ramon Quintana from the ECB. And recently, the ECB announced a new structure for its supervisory arm. And this new structure, Ramon became responsible for the Director General of the Systemic and International Banks. And previously, he was Director General of the Micro-Prudential Supervision at the ECB since 2014. He started his career at the Banco de España, where he worked for 28 years. And in his last role, he was the Director General of Banking Supervision. And I'm extremely pleased, Ramon, you're willing to share your views with us today. Big welcome to you as well. Good. Now, before I go to the panelists, let me first ask a question to the audience via the Slido box. If you could please select 3 elements that indicates an effective internal audit function in your view. And we have selected 5 options for you. You can choose from. Annual audit plan completed on time. Audit recommendations are implemented on time by management. Either C, positive feedback from management, positive feedback from the board, or E, the issues identified by supervisors or external audits have already been identified by internal audits. Please, if you could have your votes, please. I see the results coming in. Maybe I can turn to the panelists to get their view. So in your view, Sarah, if I may start with you, what steps can internal audit take to maximize its value to the organization?
Thank you very much, Willem-Jan. And let me first say it's a pleasure to be able to join you all here today. I think if you had asked me to fill in that survey as well, I would have struggled, because the answer none of the above, it's not three of any actions. And these actions themselves are interesting, but there's a lot more to it. I think I want to say, first of all, that I want to make it clear that I always like to uphold the integrity of the independence of the internal audit function. That goes without saying. It's a right of the function. But I think building a leading internal audit function is not built on the foundation of power that is implied by that right, but rather on empowerment and effective engagement. And in that respect, I thought I would share with you 4 things that I think are important to maximise the value within the organisation. And the first one, of course, is functional effectiveness. So a number of these choices that you can have on the screen are linked to functional effectiveness. I think it's very critical that the internal audit organisation understands the business, the activities that are being audited, what the ambitions are, the business plans. I think it's very important that internal audit is clear in what they're asking in terms of solutions for the findings. If I can give a very simple example, for me, it's just not good enough to say, improve the documentation. You have to say what you're looking for in the documentation, because otherwise that is a never-ending goal that nobody can achieve. And I think, of course, being proactive and ultimately that being recognised by the request for advice is as important as it is giving audits at the end of processes. But the other 3 things that are really important for me is, firstly, the leadership qualities in the audit team. I think it goes without saying that if you have the right gravitas and the right standing in the organisation, you can build mutual respect. It's much more easy to express your view, to hold your position, but in an engaged way that's much more valuable for the organisation. I think that shouldn't be underestimated. I think the other thing that is critical here is understanding the impact of culture on an organisation. You can see by my CV that I've worked in organisations with large Dutch Anglo footprints. Some of you will know the saying that what the Dutch can say in a paragraph, the Brits take a page. That has impact. You often hear people talking about the difference between Anglo-Saxons and the continent. These things have an impact on the way you want to be able to communicate, the effectiveness of any message being received by people. And it also applies to the engagement with the board. When I joined Nordea a number of years ago, I was the first non-Nordic person on that board. Let's say a Nordic internal audit function, we're speaking to people from the Nordic society. Today we are a multicultural board, and of course many of you know Jamie, he's a Brit, so you have to understand the cultural impact and how that affects communication. And then I think finally too, for internal audit to be effective, you need to use your voice. The reality is whistleblowing is important. On-site inspections of regulators are important, but quite often when matters get raised through those avenues, it's too late. And I think people need to understand you have a voice, you have the right to use it. And one example I think where you want to think about it is, particularly in a time of crisis, you cannot do all things at once. There are bandwidth issues, and you probably need to come to the board and say, I want you to be clear within the risk appetite framework, what's your risk acceptance at the moment? Do we need to think about that in order to have the capacity to get the right things done? So I would always say anything on the table is acceptable so long as it's with respect, you have the voice and you should use it. So hopefully people find that helpful.
At least I think it's very helpful, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that that with us. It's it resonates with me, to be honest, what you said. So big thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe turning over to Ramon, actually, from a GST point of view. Ramon, if you're looking at the poll, does this make you happy, or do you have different views?
No, it makes me, no, thank you. Firstly, welcome everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk to internal auditors, because for supervisors, your function as the third line of defense, it's really, really important. I think that the elements that maximize the function of the internal audit are included in its REP approach. Under the REP approach, we also analyze the auditing function. I would highlight some elements. We could talk about more. Some of them were already highlighted by Sarah. One key element, of course, is they should be able to properly map all the potential risks, including all activities and entities of the banking group. It should, very importantly, I would like to highlight this, should remain really independent, is the third line of defense, meaning independence from the business, and also the second line. It's about people, as it was mentioned before. So it's the staffing, the adequate staffing, the organization, the knowledge and experience of each people, each person, the regular training. It's very difficult to cope with the heavy changes in the financial system. A clear career path for auditors to keep them motivated. It's really important. IT systems and tools are essential. Effective collaboration with other business areas. It was also mentioned by Sarah. For us, very importantly, it has to do with another element. Raise your voice, Sarah mentioned. Effective follow-up of the remediation actions and clear empowerment. So what internal audit tells the organization should be taken very seriously, and the internal audit function should be empowered to take actions if that's not the case. And close reporting and regular reporting to the boards. These are important elements for us. And as I said, we take them into account when we assess the internal audit function. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramon. That is helpful. Maybe one question to you. When you talk about independence of the audit function, are you also aligned with Sarah when she says it talks about using the voice, so using your voice, so to echo what you see happening in the organization, to use that?
Yeah, and I mentioned the importance of reporting directly to the board. Yes, and I also mentioned empowerment. No, for us, it's very important that all the remedial actions that are considered by internal audit, they are properly ranked, risk-based, targeted, and that the institution is taking them fully into consideration, and all the action plans that must come to address them. And when we come to each institution, we look at that very closely.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ramon. Maybe looking at Henning, do you have anything to add on this poll and to what has already been said, Henning, from an external point of view?
Well, actually, yes, and thanks, Willem, Jan, and thanks everyone for having me today. It's really a great pleasure to be here and share views and observations with you. Well, actually, I would like to reiterate the first point that Sarah mentioned. Sarah called it functional effectiveness. And when I spoke in preparation of this meeting today and of this panel, I spoke to heads of audits, audit committee chairs, also also legal advisors, litigators, to get a bit of a view what really is the bottom line. It reiterates probably what Sarah said and called functional effectiveness, and that is, do make sure that you and your teams really understand the business model. The risk return profile, and the vulnerabilities. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine you're looking at the risk strategy and you have to assess as internal auditors, is this appropriate, yes or no? And you have the impression, well, not really updated on time, and you raise an observation and say, we had thought the risk strategy would need more frequent updates. Well, maybe there is a different overarching theme here, because the follow-up question would be, is the risk strategy really something that people take seriously? And what does that mean for the culture, for the risk culture of an organization? Potentially, it didn't get updated because it's not really considered that important, which would mean people don't really look at it that terribly much. And this cultural aspect is something that may be of a much wider and much more important issue. Another point would be, very often internal auditors as much as external auditors raise a finding around process description and controls and documentation not being reconciled and not being in line with what people really do. Well, of course, now the finding could be process description needs to be updated. But maybe, again, there is a wider scheme here, because if you don't have a proper understanding and description of processes and controls, well, what do you do with operational resilience? And we all know operational resilience is very high on everyone's agenda next to financial resilience, and you really need to have a very good understanding of your key services, your business models, processes, and controls in order to ensure operational resilience. And those are just very simple examples. So really the bottom line is, make sure you really understand the business model and the risk return profile. The second point I'd like to mention is agility. Apart from understanding things, it's really, the environment, macroeconomic environment, banks' business models, everything changes at unprecedented speed. And in my view, it's really essential that we are all agile and that we are willing to adapt to the new situation. And again, understand, given the new situation, what are then the new risks that may arise? Again, let me give you an example. Maybe statistical models for PD calculation in this environment with COVID-19, they may not be 100% up to date. You have a lot of post-model adjustments and overlays. Well, then the question is, do you really have proper control environment for those? So really, and that is, again, just a very simple example, data analytics, automation, digitalization, all of these changes are pretty fundamental. And I guess we all have to be agile in that environment. So those are the 2 points I would, the first one, reiterate business model understanding and risk return understanding. And the second one is continue to be agile. William Jan, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Now you can hear me again. Sorry, I pressed the button twice by accident, so apologies for that. No, thanks. So understanding business model and risk return, that is important, and agility. Maybe on that latter, you'd expect also internal audit functions to adapt their audit plan if and when required, I presume, to respond to new and emerging risks in that sense. Then.
Yes, exactly. Well, that is one element how it features, but also, should you have certain audit units and reviews scheduled? Well, maybe during the course of the review, things change, and you have additional questions that you want to look at.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks very much, Henning. Maybe turning back to the audience with another poll. So if you could all go to Slido, there's another question ready for you. That is, what are the 3 biggest challenges in improving the effectiveness of your audit department? And we've got 5 options selected for you, which is the quality and accessibility of my bank's data, cooperation with other lines of defense, insufficient resources within the audit department, attracting and retaining the right skills to the audit department, or perhaps the lack of effective audit tools. So if we can have your votes, please. Let's wait a couple of minutes when they're getting in. Whilst these are getting in, perhaps Sarah, what would you say? What do you think is the biggest challenge?
Well, I think I recognise all of the challenges. I think if you're talking about the situation that we're in currently, what I think is critical is cooperation with the other lines of defence, because during these periods, I think it's really important that you can really risk assess the organisation, and then as we say, be agile and adapt by redeploying resources where they are at greatest need. And of course, that dialogue is very important, because it might be, and if you think about what happened, say, most of the organisations back in March, where all of a sudden people had anywhere between 30 and 130,000 people working from home. The risks that needed to be understood then were not necessarily the same things that were glowing as red on any of the risk heat maps that we were looking at in January, for example. So you've got to have the right dialogue also, by the way, with the first line around where the attention needs to be. But I think you also had asked us to say, what's changed in terms of our expectation from internal audit during these current times and in times of crisis. And I would have to actually say on that question, from my perspective, nothing has changed, and I don't want things to change. And the reason I say that is because for me, internal audit needs to be built on solid structure and solid process. Because if you have solid structure and solid process, you can afford to be agile, you can afford to adapt. And as we've seen in this crisis, or if we would look back over our own businesses, our own industry, or in a situation of a pandemic, there will always be a crisis of some kind. It could be a small one like a derivatives desk fraud. It could be a banking crisis, or it can be the pandemic. You have to have a basis and a foundation in the internal audit team that remains robust, that can rely on those processes so that the organisation doesn't fall apart, so that data doesn't disappear, so that we don't lose sight of the things that were important yesterday as we redirect our attention. So I think, these are difficult times, they're testing times, but they are asking us to absolutely be certain about the strength of the way the organisation works, so that it can accommodate whatever comes at it at any point in time.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Very clear. Maybe also looking at the outcome of the poll, Ramon, maybe turning to you, is this something that you recognize? So one of the key challenges is quality and accessibility of the bank's data. Is that something you recognize also from your perspective, perhaps?
Yes, certainly. So that I would say since the beginning, so 2014, 2015, we conducted an horizontal review of PCBS 239, so data aggregation, and we've been devoting time to ensure that banks take it seriously and enhance data. It's essential, data essential for risk management. And we see honestly a weakness still. So we know that it's difficult. It's a multi-year effort. It also relates to the deficiencies and weaknesses that ITs bring in. But as I said, we insist on this because we really believe it's essential. I hope it's more about the quality rather than the accessibility, because I take for granted that internal audits should have accessibility to all the relevant data. I'm not surprised about seeing the second one in importance, retaining or attracting the right skills. We know that these are challenging times. The way it was mentioned, digitalization, data analysis, big data, etc. So all these things are really are also challenging for us. And I'm pleased to see that they rank quite at the bottom. Insufficient resources and cooperation with other lines of defense that should always be done in an appropriate way. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed, and I fully echo your comments there. And maybe turning to Henning, attracting and retaining the right skills for the audit department. How is external audits dealing with that, and what do you see internal audits departments doing in that regard? Anything you like to share?
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. That is a very key question, and and it was mentioned earlier, I think, Ramon, you made the point that talent, the right people in the internal audit function at the right place, that is the key point in order to have valuable challenge and really a effective third line of defense. And you need multiple skills. You need really good modeling skills. You need IT audit skills. So really a pretty wide range of excellent skills, and that is difficult to attract and retain. I fully understand that. And of course, we struggle with the same thing, and we have to offer good career paths. We have to offer good training. And we are, in the end, we are struggling to find talent to the same degree as internal audit functions. And of course, we are revisiting our strategies. We are looking into part-time working. We are, the challenges to attract people is totally different from, let's say, 10 years ago. The generation nowadays has totally different expectations of purpose, of work content, of work-life balance, although I really dislike that term, but nevertheless it's widely used because it seems to indicate there is a contradiction between life and work, and I fundamentally disagree with that notion, but anyhow, so you have to offer really, and you have to be innovative to offer good career, good and a purpose, really, that people feel comfortable in working. And however, let me also mention, I found it interesting, finding and attracting the right skills is on the second of the list, and we saw insufficient resources was pretty much at the bottom of the list. So it seems to me that in general, there are resources. However, the key challenge is for very specific tasks, the very specific skills and the specific talent to attract those. I guess that's a bit of a challenge, and that applies for us as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Henning. Much appreciated. Maybe a question I would like to ask to Ramon with regards to the communication between internal audits and the JST. How do you see that evolving over time? Is there anything that you see changing in that regards, Ramon?
Well, as I said at the beginning, the third line of defense is essential. No? So this means that the interaction between supervisors and such line of defense has to be intense. On the one hand, for us, it's very important to understand the context of the work. So the findings, of course, and how the bank is dealing with such findings, the remediation actions that I mentioned before. So for that, we need close interaction, we need openness from the institution, and I'm pleased to say that in general, we appreciate, so this is not changing, it's working reasonably well. From the other side, I said that we also assess within the governance element of SRED internal audit function. And it's also important for us to do the homework also to share with you why we think that there are rooms from improvement, where there are rooms from improvement, and then monitor and work along with you to ensure that the internal audit function is working properly. I think that the crisis makes this, COVID-19 crisis makes this even more important, this open dialogue. I think that it's important for internal audit, in my view, to understand how the risks are evolving so quickly, so that information should be obtained from the bank itself and a close understanding, as I said, but also it would be interesting to learn directly and indirectly about our main concerns along this, because this crisis is moving so fast that is very important. And perhaps it's also important industry-wise to have common understanding of how this crisis might be transforming the financial landscape. So yes, this interaction has always been important, but it'll become even more important, I would say, in the coming year due to COVID-19. Thanks.
Thanks, Ramon. Maybe turning back to Sarah, actually, you mentioned before, Sarah, that in terms of change in expectations from internal audit, that has not changed, because agility that you would always expect an internal audit function to have. With regards to this comment from Ramon, with regards to the open dialogue, are you in these times now in more frequent contact with your internal auditor, or has that not changed much either? You want to comment on that?
Yep. I would say amongst other executives in the bank, because of course, being the chair of the audit committee, I'm not only using internal audit as my channel into the organisation, but there's no doubt that the frequency of the dialogue has increased a lot. But having said that, if I look back, the dialogue that we enjoy is regular and frequent, generally over time. And I think the other thing is that sometimes it's very formal. It's around an organised extra meetings, and it comes with PowerPoints and presentations, and it's structured and minuted. But more importantly, we have the right balance of shall I say, relaxed conversations. So discussions over the phone, bilaterals, remarks, some free speech, because I think the balance there as well in open dialogue is being able to just say things. And if you like, the ability or the safety to say what's on your mind without having to sort of catch it in a certain way. And I think, you know, that for me is as important, because this is about people engaging with people. And at the end of the day, every single one of us sitting in this call is interested in the effectiveness and the integrity of the whole value chain of banking towards society and towards our customers. And that's not only formal dialogues, it's informal dialogues, it's open and trusting conversations. And I think they're absolutely critical, not only in a time of crisis, but just all the time.
Nicely put. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for sharing that. Maybe turning to Henning. Henning, with regards to the collaboration between the internal auditor and the external auditor, you think that that collaboration should become better in order to give like a bigger picture viewpoint to management? Your thoughts there?
Well, good question, William. I mean, I guess, you know, one part of your question around big picture, that is clearly very important. I'm not so sure whether internal auditors would need to collaborate more with external auditors to better understand a big picture. I'm sure internal auditors are very, very well placed to understand. However, you know, this aspect of big picture, I think that really is very, very important. And whenever I spoke to audit committee chairs, you know, and it probably reconciles with what Sarah just said, they are turning to internal audit and external auditors to understand, is the internal control system, is risk management appropriate and effective? And second, you know, what are the overarching themes? Instead of, you know, diving into detailed findings, the question is always looking at the big picture, you know, the changing environment, the changing business model, and all the themes that we mentioned: digitalization, automation, you know, and you know, in this environment, what are really the overarching themes when you look at the, as internal audit function, when you look at the appropriateness and effectiveness of internal controls and the risk management function? And really to, you know, identify across different audits and across different reviews, to identify overarching themes. I think that is really really key and a great value add, because you can, you know, from my perspective, executives and non-executives can turn that much better into action plans and into, you know, questions. You have a totally different dialogue if you start discussing, you know, allow me to pick up the example of Operation Resilience again. You know, you have a totally different dialogue if you discuss what do we need to do in order to be resilient from a operational perspective, instead of discussing individual project documentation and project issues. So I guess really to map individual findings to some overarching themes, and you know, relate that to the big picture, also from the perspective of the business model and the changing environment. That is where the value add is, and what the challenge is. And how do we get there? Well, I mean, clearly it does help, I would think, at least as an external auditor. For me, it's extremely helpful to understand industry trends, to understand what are the new trends, what is changing out there, and to identify such overarching themes. So therefore, collaboration in the sense of informal discussions and, you know, looking at publications and trends in the industry, that certainly helps. But in the end, really, and you know, in looking at your question again, the big picture does matter a lot, and identifying overarching themes.
Yeah, thank you, Henning, yeah, I think it would make sense to me actually. There was another poll question we had lined up for the audience, but given time, I propose to skip that one. I do have one final question actually that I would like to get your viewpoints on it, and that links a little bit back to the previous presentation that we had earlier today, whereby the key findings that were raised by the ECB when they looked at financial institutions, there were more about three areas. credit risk, IT, and overall governance. And my question, basically, let me first ask Sarah to comment on that, if you don't mind, Sarah. Do you think that internal audit is doing enough on the governance piece, and also maybe trying to make a bridge to comments made by Henning earlier about really understanding the business model and risk and return type of questions?
Yep.
What is your view there, Sarah?
I think, firstly, that probably the category of overall governance is the one that is almost most difficult, because it's the one where there's sort of like the least fact-based data, and it's asking you to think really widely about all sorts of concepts of governance, including reputational risk, for example, customer advocacy, treating customers fairly, and other conduct issues which are not sort of more easily described or measured around assets and asset quality review, etc. So I think if I look at these categories in a way, that one is the one that you need to put attention to, because you have to think broadly. I also think it's a difficult one, because I was looking at some of the questions that we were pre-discussing around, what's most important when you sort of think about where the audit committee, the internal audit function needs to be in a few years' time. And the one thing that I think is understanding that we can all talk about new ways of working and increasing digital contact, etc., etc. But one is the balance that, as I like to say, the back books are not going to go away in a hurry. So you can be interested in going quickly to the new world and digital, but the back book's still going to be there. You need to think how to get that balance right. Likewise, I think probably we don't talk enough about whether or not internal audit's got enough expertise in things like ethics. So we all talk about data, big data, AI, etc. But with that comes a new expectation around ethics. How are you going to audit ethics? How do you know how to ask the right questions? I think those are the things we need to think about. And if I may, because I know we're running out of time, there's one other thing that I think is really critical as we move forward. That is learning from each other's lessons. We all want to uphold the integrity of the industry, the trust in society. We have to really learn from each other's lessons. And, we're also in Europe, there's a lot of issues around, let's say, financial crime and know your client and anti-money laundering things. But you have to look as far afield as possible to anticipate the next 10 years. And I point to the Australian banking crisis. Trust gone. Fines immense, has cost CEOs, has cost members of the board, has cost a whole board. And it's all about treating customers fairly and conduct in a market that is advanced in defined contribution pension funds, deaccumulation and savings. All of the banks in Europe are looking for new income streams from savings. So, I just would like to say that as we try and tackle some of these, I think, broader things around governance, look far for examples in order to learn, because it's not so straightforward for us today to just know what we want to do in those areas.
Yeah, that is, I think you're very right in doing so, and maybe even a topic on how to audit ethics could well be a topic we need to put on the next banking forum agenda. I'm conscious of time. Maybe one final thought from Ramon from the ECB. When you look about governance, business model, and the changes there. Ramon, are you still with us?
Ramon, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, thanks.
I suppose you ask about COVID-19 implications, no? So, I think that all of us, and it was mentioned by Sarah, I think, before, we have to be very focused in this crisis. I mentioned that things are changing very quickly. A good example of it is, you might know that we decided to take a SREP, targeted approach, focusing on how the crisis is being dealt with. So we really encourage boards to look into strategically to forward-looking. We are seeing across the board difficulties to analyze properly LLPs, expected cost of risk, and we really encourage these, again, this forward-looking perspective, but also analyzing, and we've seen some business hits. We've mentioned perhaps some parts of investment banking, the strategic thinking around it. So I think this crisis has come, unfortunately, for a while, and structural issues, how they are going to change, have to be understood properly. We've had this REP, supervisory dialogue, targeted to the crisis. And I would say that in general, we see still issues around data aggregation, not so much, to be honest, about the third line of defense. So that's got news for all of you. We always demand more. More related to the second line of defense and how to adapt to this new environment. We are emphasizing a lot, looking into concentration, vulnerable sectors, avoiding once the moratoria is over and the support from the governments is over, to understand better what that means in terms of cost of risk, and ensuring that the board and the governance is up to the situation. We've seen that a crisis mode has been put in place, and now institutions are rightly so going back to normal situations, but factoring in the crisis development. So that's what I could say. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramon. There was one question asked by the audience, specifically for you, actually, with regards to the follow-up of ECB recommendations and the role that you see there for internal audits. Do you see that changing, or what can you say about that?
I think so. I don't remember the number, but we have certainly thousands of remediation actions that have to be followed across the board. You might know that we categorize them in 4 categories. Of course, we have to take ownership of certainly what we call F4, the highest one. But we more and more are thinking in the role that internal audit could play to review how the remedial actions are taken by banks. So we find that very valuable, and I think we really believe. I know that this sometimes is controversial, because we can also understand that internal audit has to remain independent and has to be focused on their own understanding of what is important. But we also think that this can also be on their own benefit up to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we also need to wrap up this session because we're running out of time. And it was truly a pleasure to have you part of this panel, Sarah, Henning, and also Ramon. Thank you very much for your contributions. Much appreciated. And then I would like to hand over to the president of the ECIA, Thierry Touvenot. Thierry, if you could take it from here.
Thank you, William Jan. on behalf of the ECIA board, I'm pleased to conclude the third ECIA Banking Forum in its first virtual session. Before allowing you the opportunity to network and to exchange views on topic of high interest in virtual breakout session, and before sharing with you some key takeaway or food for thought arising from this morning ECIA Banking Forum, let me first thank all the participants to this forum. So first of all, a great thanks to the speakers and to the panelist participants, with a special thanks to ECIA, a special thanks to ECB representative who consistently, since the setup of the SSM, attend the banking forum. So a great thanks for the ECB representative. Also, a great thanks to ECIA banking committee members. So you have seen some of the members facilitating the panel discussion and also chairing the banking forum. A special thanks in that respect to Jamie Graham, and also a thanks to the ECIA team to make this event possible. Let me share with you my take on this morning's speech, especially the speech from the ECB, as well as ECB representative, as well as the speech from the CEO of UniCredit. Starting with the ECB representative, the ECB supervisory board member, she clearly underlines the exceptional ECB measure, which has allowed banks to navigate through the crisis. And this has been nicely complemented by a huge government and monetary stimulus. She also clearly states that banks are in a better shape now within this current crisis in comparison with the last crisis. But this is clearly too early to declare victory, clearly too early, especially as we are acknowledging now resurgence of COVID-19 virus. She also warns the European Bank on the structural low profitability and also on the new player who are challenging banks on their market. I'm referring to fintech in that respect. She believed that the right strategy was a significant transformation and a significant consolidation of the banking sector. The opinion of Mr. Mustier was slightly different, and I would come back to that. She also recommended great attention to non-performing loans, which is of course not surprising, especially within the forthcoming quarter. And she also mentioned what she called the cliff, when the end of the government and monetary support would end. That would be surely a significant challenge for the banking industry. On the internal audit side, she acknowledged the instrumental role of internal audit, especially as far as the COVID-19 arising risk. She welcomed internal audit work on IT, cybersecurity, on credit risk, on liquidity, which she believes is of high relevance. She emphasized on the importance of internal audit to remain agile with the remote auditing and also with the tactical change triggered by the COVID-19 on the audit plan. And she finally reminded the GST key expectation as far as internal audit is concerned, which is basically to ensure that proper risk identification mechanisms are set up and that timely remedial action plans are taken. So that was it for the key takeaway as far as I'm concerned on the first speech. Now moving to the second speech from Mr. Mustier, CEO of UniCredit. Mr. Mustier highlights several key trends for the banking industry. The first one being, I thought this one very interesting, moving from shareholders consideration to stakeholder consideration, so which clearly underline the larger span of consideration for CEO of banking industry. She also underlined the crucial importance of long-term view versus short-term view in strategy, including in risk management. And he mentioned as a good example that his key risk indicator, which trigger any variable remuneration, is over 9 years, which is very interesting. He also called for a selective cost cutting, within the banking industry, not destructing value, but ensuring that we still remain focused on client experience. He do consider that the simplification of process, the simplification of products are key to compete with fintech. So in that extent, is fully aligned with the ECB representative. And you also consider that transformation is the key element for the bank versus integration. So you do believe that it's better for bank management to focus on transforming the business model, transforming the process, instead of integrating banks. And as you have to choose, you cannot handle the two, and he would favor, without any doubt, the transformation. He has also mentioned that the liquidity issue as being now proven to be a solvency issue for banking clients, which is quite interesting to mention, especially in the context that he was also reporting that bank has, as of today, excess of capital, while this is not the case for the clients. He called for a strategy and risk management perspective where you will manage the unexpected and where you need to plan for the worst. I do believe this is also a very interesting point. And despite this, he also called for keeping human in the center of decision making. As far as internal audit is concerned, he made few recommendations as far as the data analytics, which is really powerful, and he found this of high relevance for the internal audit industry. And he shared with us the operational risk main focus he has within UniCredit and also before within his former employer. And he mentioned that as for him, this is key to have operational risk properly managed and even of more relevance within the COVID-19 crisis. So that was the take for the two speech this morning. So for the sake of time, I will not go through the take of this afternoon panel discussion. That should be very fresh in your mind. And I would leave the floor to the ECIA General Secretary, who would guide you through the logistic for the breakout session. So Pascal, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as you have seen in the program, you are now invited to join some networking session. And for that, you have first of all to make up your choice which one you would like to follow. So you will have room number 1 that will speak about the impact of COVID in terms of audit plan and also role of the internal audit department in a crisis. Room number 2 will be more focused on how the internal audit department be better prepared for the next crisis or the next extraordinary risk. And the third room will more focus on remote auditing. To join this room, we will give you 5 minutes, a small break, so that you can connect in Zoom and that we can see each other and have an informal discussion. In case you have security access issue with Zoom, as you have seen in the agenda for today and in your calendar, you can also follow via Vimeo, like you have been following this morning and this afternoon, and we will use Slido for the question. So I suggest that we make a 5 minutes break to give you time to join us in the room and to have now an informal discussion. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you in a room soon.